Welcome back, YouTube. This is Rich again, back for an exclusive YouTube video blog. Tonight's YouTube video blog is a tribute to Ole Anderson, who passed away this past week at the age of 81. Ole was one of the most famous wrestlers and promoters of all time. But first, these important messages. Don't forget to listen to Crystal's Time Machine each and every Friday and Saturday night from 9 to 11 p.m. on WCAP 980, where everybody gets it. If you can't catch the show live, listen to the podcast exclusively on archive.org. Goes back to October 2015. Follow Crystal on Twitter at Crystal Amy John and Machine Crystal. Follow her on Instagram at Crystal Johnson. Follow her on Facebook, the official Crystal Time Machine Facebook page, the official Crystal Time Machine group page, and Game Show fan page. And also follow her on YouTube at Crystal Johnson. She does one exclusive video a week. Follow me on Twitter at Chewy7. Follow me on Instagram at Rich Celso. Follow me on YouTube at Rich Celso. 2 exclusive videos a week. And say hello to Broadway Pizza, the official sponsor of Crystal's Time Machine. And if you say the promo code Crystal's Time Machine, $2 off your meal. So that's pretty good. Okay, now back to the feature presentation. Okay. Few days ago, one of the founding members of the Four Horsemen, Ole Anderson, passed away at the age of 81 due to health issues. Ole was born in Minnesota under the name of Al Wasiski. He got into the world of professional wrestling in 1967. He was trained by Dick the Bruiser and Vern Gagne, the longtime AWA World Champion and promoter and owner of the AWA. He started his wrestling career in the AWA in 1967, wrestling under his real name briefly, but soon afterwards he took the name of Ole Anderson. And for most of his wrestling career, Ole Anderson wrestled in Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling and Georgia Championship Wrestling, but he had a few stints in Championship Wrestling from Florida. Ole was one of the most famous heels of all time. He teamed up with his fictitious brother, Gene Anderson, whose real name was actually Anderson. His real last name was Anderson. And they were the Minnesota Wrecking Crew. They won several regional tag team championships and had a legendary feud with Wahoo McDaniels and Paul Jones and Greg the Hammer Valentine and Nature Boy Ric Flair. They just traded the tag team championships of Mid-Atlantic many times, and Ole Anderson's promos were very great. He was a classic heel. Later on, like, Ole and Gene recruited Lars Anderson as their other brother. Then they're not related in real life. One of the most famous angles that Ole Anderson did was in 1980 when he turned face and feuded with the Assassins, who were Jody Hamilton and Tom Renesco. Those were the original ones. Jody Hamilton's son was former WCW and WWE referee Nick Patrick. And Ole actually tricked Dusty Rhodes to be his tag team partner in a steel cage match against the Assassins in the Omni in Atlanta, and then like Ole turned on Dusty. Special guest referees were Gene Anderson and Ivan Koloff, and it was like 5-on-1, and it nearly caused a riot. They had several wrestlers try to rescue Dusty Rhodes, including Lars Anderson, and the interview that Ole Anderson did a week after on Georgia Championship Wrestling with Gordon Solie was very, very classic. Behind the scenes, Ole became a booker for and promoter for Georgia Championship Wrestling, and he also for a time was promoter of booker of Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling, and Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling and Georgia Championship Wrestling had talent exchanges, and they had big time supercards. This is well before pay per view and special events, but only backstage was known as pig faced by many of the wrestlers. Plus, there were rumors that he was racist, but there was no claim to that because I was never around him. So you can't claim you can't say he's a racist if you um don't see it to believe it. And Ole continued his wrestling career. He bounced around from face to heel many times. He had feuds with Rowdy Piper and Thunderbolt Patterson and others around this time. As in 1984, Ole's was very, very shocked to hear that some of the owners of Georgia Championship Wrestling sold their shares to Vince McMahon, and Ole got mad about that because he did not want to be working for the WWE. And he used the F word to Vince McMahon. And a week later, when Vince McMahon came with his wife Linda, he said F you to her as well. Ole never wrestled for the WWE. He got back on, formed a new group in Georgia called Championship Wrestling from Georgia, which that eventually morphed into Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling on TBS, which was World Championship Wrestling. In 1986, Ole Anderson was one of the original, was one of the founding members of the Four Horsemen, including his cousin Arn Anderson and Nature Boy Ric Flair and Tully Blanchard. They were managed by J.J. Dillon. Ole and Arn were tag team for about 2 years. They won the National Tag Team Championships a few times, and they had a legendary feud with the Rock and Roll Express. In early 1987, Ole was booted out of the Horsemen because he missed some time to see one of his sons, Bryant, do an amateur wrestling competition. And Ole became a face, and he feuded with Big Bubba Rogers. He was supposed to have a program with Nature Boy Ric Flair over the NWA World Champion, but Ole just decided to take a break from wrestling and watch his son in the amateurs. He also did some booking for Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling, which morphed into WCW. He came back in a prominent role in 1990 with a reformed Four Horsemen with him and Flair and Arn Anderson and Sting. But at the Clash of Champions in February 1990, they booted Sting out of the group because of refusing to give up his world title shot against Ric Flair at Wrestle War 90. And Ole briefly returned to the ring. He and Arn had a brief feud with the Steiner brothers, but Ole was washed up as a wrestler. He concentrated more on managing the Four Horsemen and also booking for WCW. He tried to get the belt off of Ric Flair many times during 1990, but Flair refused to drop the belt. Eventually, Ole was more reduced to booking a backstage role for WCW for many years. He actually provided the voice of the Black Scorpion and the Shockmaster. In 1992, Ole resurfaced as a troubleshooting referee for WCW. I heard the plans was eventually he was going to be becoming a crooked referee and turning heel and probably forming a heel stable. But that did not come to be. Eventually, Ole was reduced to being one of the trainers at the power plant. He was inducted into WCW Hall of Fame in 1994, but he was fired in the summer of 1994 when Eric Bischoff fired him over the phone. Eric fired a lot of wrestlers over the phone, including Steve Austin. Ole briefly resurfaced as a manager in Smoky Mountain Wrestling to manage his son Bryant, who had a brief wrestling career. Bryant retired in 1995 to become a lawyer. And after Ole left Smoky Mountain Wrestling as a manager, he basically retired from the business, and he just talked about he disliked how wrestling became regional to sports entertainment. He wrote a book in 2003, how pro wrestling inside and out, how corporate America destroyed wrestling, and it was like he blasted many people in the wrestling business, including Vince McMahon, Paul Heyman, Michael P.S. Hayes, and a few others. Ole in the late 2000s was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, but he appeared at wrestling conventions for a few years afterwards, but his mobility became limited and he had memory issues. And some of the shoot interviews he did in the late 2000s and early 2010s were classic. And Ole made on average over $100,000 a year during his prime years, but the last few years of his life, he was actually living in a trailer park with nursing care. Very, very sad to hear that when you made hundreds of thousands of dollars in wrestling. Don't know what he did with all that money. He had 7 children, and maybe he gave some of his money to his children, and was very sad a few days ago when Ole passed away at the age of 81. Ole was never inducted in the WWE Hall of Fame with the Four Horsemen. That was Arn Anderson, Tully Blanchard, Barry Windham, Ric Flair, and J.J. Dillon. Ole was not going to accept an induction to the WWE Hall of Fame, but he's in Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and also the NWA Hall of Fame. And wrestling lost one of its best bookers and one of its best heels ever last week. So rest in peace, Ole Anderson. Four Horsemen. Thank you for all your support. I'll be back again soon.